much. Let me thank Congressman Al Green and Congressman Ted Poe for their leadership in organizing the Special Order on Domestic Violence. It's critical to speak out against domestic violence and call attention to Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but it's extremely important to hear from men and to recognize your leadership on this. As someone who understands domestic violence on a deeply personal level, I know how traumatic this experience is and the strong, consistent support system needed to emerge as a survivor. And I also know from personal experience that domestic violence is not only physical, it is emotional. It is brutal, it is dehumanizing to the batterer and the battered. And without strong and enforceable criminal laws and services, one's life can be shattered and destroyed. And so, as a survivor of domestic violence, once elected to the California legislature, I knew I had to do something. And I'm so glad to see my colleague, Congresswoman Jackie Spear, who was then in the legislature at that time. And we worked so hard on domestic violence issues. And I'll never forget, I was able to write California's Violence Against Women's Act, and wrote many domestic violence bills that were signed into law by a Republican governor. And again, coming to Congress now, we've worked together in co-sponsoring numerous bills in Congress to support victims of domestic violence and to prevent domestic violence. We've also worked extensively, and this is in my home district in Oakland, with a Safe Place, which is a victim-centered agency, because we know that staying in a shelter or working with an advocate significantly reduces the chances that a victim will be abused again and improves the victim's quality of life. A Safe Place in Oakland is Oakland's only comprehensive domestic violence program for battered women and children. They provide both shelter and professional supportive services to victims of domestic violence and have truly been a vital agency in my district. A Safe Place has served Oakland for 34 years and earlier this month held its 10th annual walk against domestic and teen dating violence. This walk continues to call attention to the issues of dating and domestic violence in the city of Oakland, building vital partnerships with law enforcement, the criminal justice system, and faith-based organizations to better serve the community and the region. Their programs and services are designated to address the many complicated, and I mean these are complicated issues which affect victims of domestic violence and are a true blessing to my constituents and my community. It's my hope that we use Domestic Violence Awareness Month to recommit ourselves to fighting the scourge of violence against women and men. We've made some accomplishments over the decades on this issue, but challenges still remain. Around the world, nearly 1 in 3 women has been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused in her lifetime. Here in the United States, as many as 1 in 3 American women report being physically or sexually abused by a husband or a boyfriend at least once in their lives. Children who see or experience domestic violence have a much greater chance to become either victims or perpetrators as adults. They're also more likely to attempt suicide, use drugs and alcohol, run away from home, engage in teenage prostitution, and commit other crimes. Beyond the cost to children, domestic violence affects the community, with as many as half of domestic violence victims reporting a loss of a job, at least in part due to domestic violence. And so cuts to domestic violence programs should not even be on the table. Women make up 70% of the deaths, mind you, deaths caused by intimate partner violence. And services and abuse for heterosexual men and those in the LGBT communities are clearly non-existent. And so although this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we can't just work on this during October. We must remember that for men, women, and children who are experiencing or who have experienced domestic violence, every day must be a day of awareness, also a day free from emotional badgering, physical assaults, harassment, stalking, and every other violent behavior which constitutes domestic violence. Thank you again, Mr. Green.
I thank the gentlelady from California.